It's hard to follow. It is very hard to follow Professor Paternaik's lecture.
Right.
I mean, his style.
Recently, I collected your books, Multidimensional Well-Being. Professor Patnaik and you jointly edited.
Yeah.
So I think I'll make some time to go through it because finding space for reading a whole book in such a hectic time is
Yeah.
it requires keeping the gap. Hello, Indrani. Hello. How are you?
How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
I'm keeping up with the space.
Good.
So lots of emails and lots of things are pending, and I have to catch up those as soon as possible.
Maybe you're doing too much.
Yes, maybe. Yes, Professor Maurice Salis has joined. Hello, we are honored. Professor Maurice Salis. Hello, Professor Maurice Salis. Hello. Namaskar. Professor Maurice Salis, you are muted, so please unmute so that we can hear your voice.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, welcome and namaskar to the fourth session.
Thank you very much. So are you
Professor,
well now?
yes, I'm recovering fast, and hopefully will be regular in few days.
Fine. Good.
Thank you. Professor Prashant Patnaik is here, and our speaker, Professor Yongsheng Xu, is here too.
Hello, Maurice.
Hello, you. How are you?
It's very nice to see you. You look good.
Nice to see you too.
Hello, Maurice.
Hello. Hello, Prasanta.
Hello. How are you?
I'm fine. And you?
Fine, thank you.
So, I think we have 1 minute to.
This is the fourth session, right?
This is the fourth session.
Right.
Actually, now joining Alex, he is actually a PhD fellow. Hello, Alex.
Hi.
Hi. Meet today's speaker, Professor Yongsheng Xu, our convener, Professor Prashant Patnaik, Professor Maurice Salis, Indrani Sigmani, and Kishore Khanal and Najma Sheikh. We are all here.
Hello. It's really good to meet all of you.
So Alex connects from Germany, right? He is doing PhD in Germany. So
yeah, I just finished I just finished my master's. I'm planning to do a PhD with Dr. Hu in Ireland.
Okay. That's wonderful. So it's 9 and Dhaka time. So I beg Professor Patnaik's permission. Sir, can I begin?
Please.
Thank you, sir. Respected Professor Dr. Yongsheng Xu, dear participants, our convener, respected convener, Professor Prashanto Patnaik, one of our upcoming speaker, distinguished speaker, Professor Maurice Saleh, distinguished guests and friends, a very warm welcome, a good evening to you all. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you all once again to the Individual Wellbeing and Social Welfare Study Circle organized by the Banglar Pathshala Foundation. As we gather today for session 4, I feel both humbled and inspired by the continuity of our intellectual journey, a journey that began with illuminating inaugural lecture by Nobel laureate Professor Amartya, followed by the deeply reflective sessions of Professor Prashanto Kumar Patnaik and Professor Paul Anand. Together, these lectures have taken us from the philosophical roots of welfare economics to its ethical and evaluative dimensions, helping us reimagine the meaning of individual well-being and collective justice in our societies. Today, we are privileged to join by another distinguished scholar and thinker whose work has significantly shaped the landscape of modern welfare economics and social choice theory, Professor Yongsheng Xu. Dr. Xu is a professor of economics at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies, Georgia State University, Atlanta, USA, whose pioneering contributions have deepened our understanding of fairness, equity, and welfare measurement. His research spans normative economics, social choice theory, and the axiomatic foundations of distributive justice, areas that lie at the very heart of our study circle's exploration. Let me say a few more words on him. He has done research on theory of individual and social choice and welfare economics and decision theory. His publications include papers in various academic journals and 3 edited books. His co-edited book with Professor Prashanto Patnaik, Multidimensional Well-Being, Deprivation and Inequality, Conceptual Issues and Measurement, published in 2024 by Springer. In today's session, Professor Xu will lead us into a critical discussion on how ethical reasoning can be formalized and operationalized in assessing well-being and welfare. His scholarship, bridging theoretical rigor with normative depth, resonates profoundly with the central echoes of our study circle to cultivate dialogue that unites moral philosophy with development practice. As we continue this collective pursuit, I would like to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of our participants joining from more than 18 countries and to our academic leaders, Professor Sen, Professor Patnaik, Professor Anand, Professor Su, Professor Dev, Professor Morris, and others, whose guidance continues to enrich our understanding. Let us now turn to the lecture by Professor Su, whose insights I'm sure will not only deepen our grasp of welfare theory, but also inspire us to reflect on the ethical underpinnings of human development and social justice. Professor Xu, it is a privilege to have you with us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction, Dr. Chowdhury. And thanks to everyone that you are here. And so let me share my screen with you. Right. So I'm hoping that everyone can see what I
Yes,
see.
it's clear and visible.
Okay, thank you. Let me move around. So for today, I will lead the discussion on this notion of individual freedom. And this is perhaps a crucial concept in the functioning and capability approach to individual well-being. The lecture is based on chapters 4 and 5 of the book by Professor Paternaik and myself, published last year, Multidimensional Well-being, Innovation and Inequality. So my plan is the following. So it are 5 sort of parts. I will give some sort of brief introduction to see the kind of issues, intuition that involved in the discussion of individual freedom in the functioning capability approach. And then I will discuss a particular sort of area in which we try to measure freedom of individuals. And so we will develop some initial intuition. And then we will base our intuition from there, try to see if any other issues so that we can discuss the value of freedom. And from there, I will touch on the issue of interpersonal comparisons of individual freedom. And as a matter of fact, interpersonal comparisons of individual well-being, that was well discussed by Professor Paternaik's lecture. So I will say a few words there. And then to conclude the discussion, I will mention a few sort of problems with the approach that we are adopting today. So that's the kind of plan for today. So let me start by recalling the basic feature of the functioning capability approach to individual well-being, as discussed by Professors Ahmed and Paternaik. So in a functioning capability approach to individual well-being, so to start with, there are a few sort of identified valuable functionings that individuals value. And then from there, for each individual, and that individual would use resources and use some other sort of resources like institutions, and also the individual's condition and circumstances to convert those resources into various levels of functionings. So in that world, individuals' well-being can be identified from that individual's achieved functioning bundle, and also in the meantime, the opportunity set from which her achieved functioning bundle is realized. So in particular, and for today's discussion, I will focus on individuals' opportunity set. And this is a collection of all the functioning bundles that are feasible for her to choose to reflect. And the reason for focusing on opportunity set is that in this particular approach to individual well-being, individual's freedom of choice is reflected by her opportunity set. So that is the kind of crucial role that freedom plays in the functioning capability approach. And so it matters a lot. And to use an example to motivate the role that freedom plays in this notion of individual well-being. So let's go back to Sen's example concerning fasting and starvation. So in his example, and we have, for example, for this fasting, and fasting perhaps due to a political belief or spiritual belief or whatever. So their fasting is due to a person's and his political or spiritual reason. And fasting different from starvation. And starvation, that is due to a lack of food, right? And so there, one would typically think that fasting is the individual's choice, so that he or she can realize a particular sort of goal in a process, and she's sacrificing her physical well-being. But starvation is very different. That is an individual's lack of food, not enough food to eat. And that is deprivation of her freedom to some extent. And that is not good on her physical well-being. So, in other words, and if we summarize his example in this in a framework of a functioning capability approach, and so here we have an individual. Think about a person who has no other options to choose but that particular function bundle X chosen from. There's no other options, right? And but on the other hand, and for a person, different person perhaps, and in that case, and we have this realized function bundle X, and that is chosen from the availability of many other options. So the message here is that we need to make distinction between a bundle chosen from a opportunity set that contains many other options. That is different from the same bundle chosen from opportunity set that contains that bundle only. So that in the second case, individual has no other choice, and perhaps to some extent her freedom is zero. And so that is the kind of intuition underlying the role that freedom plays in the functioning capability approach. And so he wants to make distinction between those two different situations. And of course, that begs sort of a very sort of questions. And one of them is that how are we to measure individual freedom? I will come back to that later. And before we do that, and so I want to sort of again review what Professor Ahmed and Professor Pathshala did in their lectures. So first of all, this capability set in the functioning capability approach to individual well-being. And so here we will call a capability set as opportunity set, right? And this is conceived as the set of all mutually exclusive functioning bundles that are feasible for an individual, given all those sort of constraints, physical constraints, environmental constraints, social constraints, legal constraints. So considering all those constraints, individual can convert resources into various functioning bundles, and then we collect them together. That is individual's opportunity set, right? So given that notion of opportunity set, and it further assumes in the functioning capability approach to individual well-being that individual can choose any functioning bundle from the opportunity set. So with that in mind, then the individual's freedom is formulated as her ability to choose any of those functional bundles from her opportunity set. So when you face with a particular opportunity set, and so we visualize the degree of freedom offered to that individual as reflected by her opportunity set. So that's the kind of a concept of individual freedom that one can visualize in the functioning capability approach to individual well-being. And so now for next, we will try to develop some intuition as how we should think about individual's freedom, how we should measure an individual's freedom. So here, I say we, and this we it can be the evaluator of individual freedom that Professor Paternaik discussed in his lecture, and can be any of us perhaps who is interested in evaluating a particular given individual's freedom. Can be a philosopher, can be economist, can be any social scientist doing research. So, and the first to measure individual freedom and to have a sense about individual freedom, and we need to make some assumptions. And in particular, we want to start with the kind of the domain that we'll be dealing with, so that we can talk about an individual's freedom over this domain. So that here we have this first assumption, assumption one. And assumption one says that the class of all admissible opportunity set. So the opportunity set that we are going to analyze is the class of all non-empty and finite subsets of a given set of all possible functional bundles. So in other words, and imagine that an individual using resources and giving her constraints, and she can convert those resources into various functional bundles, all right? And so we are interested in the following. At any given time, this individual would be facing an opportunity set that contains a finite number of options, functional bundles. So that is what assumption one is about. And we'll be dealing with various empty and finite subsets of those possible functional bundles. So the crucial thing here is that each opportunity set contains, let's say, 5 functional bundles or 6 functional bundles or 100 functional bundles, and it is finite. And then to evaluate her freedom offered by those various opportunity sets, we have this freedom ranking to do that. So we imagine this individual has a way of ranking those different various opportunity set in terms of freedom of choice offered to her. And so in particular, this freedom ranking ranks various opportunity set, all right? And with the following interpretation: for any given two opportunity sets, A and B, and we can say that opportunity set A offers more freedom than opportunity set B. We can also say that, well, A and B, they offer the same amount of freedom, or freedom offered by A is at least as great as freedom offered by B. So in other words, we have this freedom ranking, and it ranks all those different opportunity sets for the individual in terms of freedom that they offer. So with that in mind, and now we make another sort of assumption, and this assumption is about this freedom ranking, and we assume that freedom ranking is transitive, and this transitivity, I think it was discussed by Professor Paternaik in his lecture. So intuitively and simply, the freedom ranking is assumed to be transitive, meaning that it can be carried over. So in particular, if you have three opportunity sets, let's say numbers A, B, and C, all right? And when A offers at least as much freedom as B, and B offers at least as much freedom as C, and then given information there, we can conclude that A must offer at least as much freedom as C, so that the ranking can be carried over, in other words. And this is a fairly sort of common assumption in economics and also in decision theory. And now for the next, I want to invite us to think about some sort of initial intuitions that we have in terms of visualize, in terms of evaluating an individual's freedom. And so typically the freedom ranking can be very complex, and our intuition about freedom can also be complicated, but we will start with some simple sort of situations, right? And with those simple situations, we are hoping to develop some intuition so that we can use those intuitions to have a sense about how we should rank those opportunity set in terms of freedom offered to a particular individual. So the first situation is the following. Suppose we face two different sort of scenarios. In the first case, an individual we observe is that we're having opportunity set that contains a single option. That's, let's say, X or Apple. And then in another scenario, individual, again, facing a simple opportunity set containing a single option, Y, or let's say a pair, right? So in other words, in each scenario, we observe that individual facing opportunity set containing just one single option. So there, perhaps our intuition would say that, well, in each case, there's only one option on the table, right? And one option in the menu. So that individual really does not have any freedom. So the freedom in this case is 0. And if we use that intuition, and then perhaps we can argue that, well, for those two cases, individual would have the same amount of freedom, right? So in particular, assumption 3, called indifference of no choice situations, says that for any two alternatives, let's say X and Y, the opportunity set containing X only offers the same amount of freedom as the opportunity set containing Y only. So again, the intuition is that, well, in each case, there's no freedom of choice and 0 freedom. Being 0 freedom in each case, and then perhaps we could claim that those two situations, those two opportunity set, would offer an individual the same amount of freedom. So that's the first intuition. That's intuition for the first case, right? And now consider another case. In this case, and we have again 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, there are 2 options in the opportunity set. So in this case, we can think, well, 2 options, X and Y, or those 2 options, 1 apple and 1 pear, for example. And then another situation, another scenario in which we have only 1 option, let's say X or apple. So now let's analyze those 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, an individual facing opportunity set containing 2 options, X and Y. And then in the second scenario, individual facing opportunity set containing a single option, X. So as we discussed earlier, and if individual facing an opportunity set containing a single element, and given our interpretation about individual choice, individual has no choice, so that freedom 0. But in the first scenario, now individual has both X and Y there. So if individual doesn't want to choose X, and then there is Y available, and vice versa. So in the first scenario, we could imagine that there is some scope of making choice. Yeah, an individual could choose X or could choose Y. So some scope. So, and in the second scenario, there's no scope, right? The freedom is 0. So with that, by having something else to choose from the opportunity set apart from X, and then perhaps in our intuition would tell us that, well, the opportunity set containing both X and Y, that opportunity set offers more freedom than the opportunity set containing just X. So this is another sort of intuition. A bit more choices would give individual more freedom. And this is called strict monotonicity. So those are the 2 simple situations. And perhaps we can develop some sort of simple intuition. And then for the next, there's another scenario. And then perhaps we can also develop some intuition. So here it says, well, suppose we have opportunity set A and we have opportunity set B, all right? And suppose that we can evaluate the individual's freedom for those 2 opportunity sets. Now imagine we have an alternative X, option X, which is new to both A and B. So something not there in A, and X is not in B either. So with that in mind, now let's add this new option to A and add new option to B. So after that, those 2 additions, and we have 2 new opportunity sets. So there perhaps our initial intuition that, well, whatever we evaluate individual's freedom between A and B, and that particular evaluation should be preserved once we add this new alternative to A and B. You'll hear a question?
I'm sorry, sir. That was that was not the question. Actually,
Okay.
somebody accidentally unmute the audio.
Okay, thank you. So this assumption has a name called independence. And formally, it says that for any two opportunity sets, A and B, and for any alternative X, which is new to A and to B, given information there, the freedom ranking over A and B remains the same when each of them is enlarged, is added, this new alternative X. So this is another sort of intuition. And now let's pause and try to examine. Well, suppose we have those three intuitions, right? And now suppose we combine those three intuitions together so that we ask this freedom ranking to have those three assumptions, what we get. And it turns out if we combine them together, and then we have only one particular way of evaluating individuals' freedom. That is to count the number of options in an opportunity set. So the freedom ranking would be working as follows. Faced with two opportunity sets, A and B, right? And we count number of options in A and count number of options in B, and whichever has more number of options would be said to have offered more freedom to the individual. And that number counting rule is the so-called cardinality-based rule. And this is defined as follows. So the freedom ranking is called the cardinality-based rule for ranking opportunity sets. If and only if for any two opportunity sets A and B, the freedom offered by A is at least as great as the freedom offered by B whenever the number of options in A is at least as many as the number of options in B. So basically, we are comparing the numbers in those opportunity sets, and then we use those numbers to rank their degrees of freedom offered to the individual. So here's the result. And so suppose assumption one holds, that is about a domain restriction. And then the freedom ranking is the cardinality-based rule for ranking opportunity sets if and only if those four assumptions are satisfied. So remember that assumption two is about the well-behaved freedom ranking. So their freedom ranking is transitive. And then 3, 4, and 5, those the kind of simple intuitions that we discussed earlier. And we try to get our intuition in simple scenarios, and then we build up, see what happens. And now we might be thinking, well, that is this cardinality-based rule a reasonable rule? And some of us might say, well, perhaps not. And there's too much focus on the quantity of options in the opportunity set. So, for example, and if we sort of think about other sort of situations, not in a functioning cooperative approach. And suppose that we are thinking issues like political freedom, right? And if we use this kind of cardinality-based rule for thinking, and then perhaps one of the ideas would be like, well, I mean, to see if a country offers more or less freedom, and then we count the number of political parties, perhaps, in a country. And so comparing two different countries, and if a country has more political parties than another country, and then according to the rule, we might want to claim that first country has more political freedom than the second one. But we all know that, well, that can be very misleading, right? So for the next, and I want to sort of discuss what is happening behind this cardinality-based rule. So before we go on, move on, and I don't know if there's any quick question.
Is there any question or just Mr. Altaf Russell? Hello.
No. Actually, I'm enjoying the class.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay.
Okay.
Professor
Then
Yongsheng. Professor
No
Yongsheng, you carry on.
All right. Thank you. So, well, so that is, now we need to bring this so-called value of options into the picture. But before we do that, and in a philosophical discussion of individual freedom, and I want to mention this distinction made by philosophers. And so they have been trying to argue that measuring an individual freedom is perhaps different from measuring the value of the freedom that an individual enjoys, that individual attaches to the opportunity set. And so that distinction perhaps is quite sort of useful for us to think about the earlier cardinality-based rule and the subsequent sort of discussions on value of freedom. So now remember that we want to discuss the value of freedom, right? So with that, and if we still think in terms of freedom ranking, yeah, now freedom ranking has a new, or we should interpret freedom ranking slightly differently from what we have been doing so far. So now freedom ranking is interpreted as the following. So for any given two opportunity sets A and B, right? And the freedom ranking will do the following. The value of the freedom offered by A is at least as great as the value of the freedom offered by B. So remember that early on, we didn't use the value. We just said, well, opportunity set A offers more freedom than opportunity set B. But here we need to say, to understand that A offers more value of freedom than B. Right. So once we venture into the value of the freedom, then perhaps we need to bring this apart from quantity of options available in the opportunity set. We also need to investigate the so-called quote-unquote quality of options in the opportunity set. And well, let's perhaps take a look at the three assumptions that we discussed early on. The first one, indifference of no choice situation there. So there we said that, well, I mean, in each case, when an individual faces opportunity set containing just a single option, so if there are two such simple cases, then there our intuition told us that the individual would have the same amount of freedom. But we might want to sort of argue that, well, wait, in a functioning cooperative approach, right, and individuals also sort of value those bundles differently. So imagine that, suppose that we identify functionings like health and education, for example. And suppose we consider two bundles, X and Y, and bundle X dominates bundle Y. So bundle X has more higher level of education and a better health outcome than bundle Y. And then in that case, some of us might argue that, well, even if each opportunity set, remember that opportunity set containing X and opportunity set containing Y, even if there's no quote unquote freedom of choice, but the value that X, this bigger bundle, offers individual a higher level of well-being than the bundle Y. So there, perhaps this kind of evaluation done by an individual can be a factor in evaluating an individual's freedom. So in particular, and in this case, there's a reason to perhaps argue that, well, individuals' freedom in terms of value, so value of freedom offered by opportunity set containing X is higher than the value of opportunity set offered by the set containing Y only, right? And similarly, and when we add this Y to X, right? Because Y is dominated by X in terms of those identified functionings. And a reasonable person or any individual will not choose in the presence of X. And so adding Y to X will not sort of enlarge the value of freedom already offered by opportunity set containing X. So if we use the new intuition about the values of those options, then assumption 3 and assumption 4 may not hold, right? And we might say, well, because for assumption 3, and now we would try to argue that the opportunity set containing this bigger bundle actually offers more value of freedom than the opportunity set containing this smaller bundle Y. And as far as assumption 4 is concerned, and the opportunity set containing X and Y would offer the same value of a freedom as the opportunity set containing just X. The reason is that, well, as far as the value is concerned, and Y does not add any to the value already offered by X. So, and similarly, one could sort of think about assumption 5 and in a similar sort of fashion, and imagine that this new option X, and suppose that this option X is dominated by some bundle in A, but not dominated by any bundle in X. So there we may not want to sort of accept this particular assumption. So
Here
again,
can I ask you a question here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
What will be the implication if the assumption of independence violates here?
Implication of assumption 3 violated.
if independence, the assumption 5, if assumption 5 doesn't hold,
Now,
what will you do?
what do we do that? Well, I mean, there are many options, right? And we have to investigate why independence is not there. And we just discussed one scenario, and there are many other reasons, right? So it could be like, well, think about this alternative X to be added to both A and B, right? And one, we might reason that, well, I mean, perhaps this X is so sort of similar to options already offered in A, but very dissimilar options in B. And then in that case, and we might need to discuss, well, so here is information about similarity, right? So with that, and we might want to investigate, well, perhaps in this case, and as far as those opportunity sets are concerned, and if we want to evaluate individual freedom, then perhaps we should bring in information about some kind of, let's say, diversity of those options, right? And so again, if we go back to this political freedom, so there, and suppose let's start with simple scenario, like A and B, like, well, A contains a party. Let's say define that party as somewhere, so that its policy is always to the left, far left. And then we have a party B, contain opportunity set B, and that party, its policy would be somewhere in the middle, right? So with those two, now let's consider this new party X, right? And this new party X, well, let's suppose that this new party X is also offering policies very to the left, all right? And so that it's very similar to the party already there in A. And on the other hand, as we can see that, well, I mean, if this X is a kind of leftist party, but the party in B, that existing party is somewhere in the middle. So there, this new party X is very different, perhaps, from this middle of the road party. So even if this new party X is new to both A and B, those parties in A and B, but this new party is very similar, almost indescribable to the existing party in A. So there, by adding this new party, the X to A, will not actually increase, will not do anything. And so even if on a name, A has two parts, now after enlargement, we have two parties, and also B has two parties. But when we want to evaluate the freedom offered by the new enlarged sort of opportunity set, and this independence may not hold, right? So there, and we want, one possibility is that we want to sort of group those options in the opportunity set by this relation, by this idea, similarity, for example, right? And tries to say, well, this cluster of parties, yeah, they are so similar, so let's put them together. And we do that, group them together. And then perhaps use that information to see if we can evaluate opportunity set in terms of political freedom in this case, for example, or in terms of freedom in general. So in other words, it depends on the information.
So in that case, the problem will be created in valuing freedom, right?
Can you please repeat your question? I didn't hear the question.
I'm asking that if there is no independence, if assumption 5 is does not hold, in that case, the problem will be created in valuing freedom, right?
So if we do not have independence property, but we have other assumptions made so far, and then we will not be able to derive cardinality-based rule.
Right, right. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you for your question. So there, now the issue is how are we going to make assessment about the quality of those options in opportunity set, right? And again, let's stick to the functioning capability approach. And in this approach, and according to Sen, there are two methods that we can evaluate the quality of options. And the first method is the so-called self-evaluation. And the second one is the standard evaluation. So intuitively speaking, self-evaluation works as follows, right? So remember that we want to evaluate those various opportunity set in terms of freedom offered to a particular individual, right? And so when we try to do that exercise, then for self-evaluation, we try to figure out, we try to get information, how individual that we are analyzing, how that particular individual evaluate those options. So that is, so we depending on how that individual evaluates those options, then we use that information for us to evaluate various opportunity set in the context of freedom offered to that individual. And then for the standard evaluation, so there intuitively, it is something like individual. For this particular individual, we know that that individual lives in a particular society, right? And we could imagine, well, perhaps in this society, there's some kind of standard or some kind of norm or some kind of common way of evaluating those options. And so, for example, we could invoke, I don't know, some kind of majority, right? If the majority of individuals in a society that this individual lives in evaluate those options similarly, and then we will use that particular evaluation method of evaluating options, all right, and then use that to evaluate opportunity set in terms of freedom offered to that particular individual. So let me be more specific, right? So let's first focus on self-evaluation. So here we evaluate of individual freedom, right? And we want to go by self-evaluation. So here we want to figure out how a particular individual, for that individual, how that individual evaluates those various options, function bundles in her opportunity set, right? So if we go that way, and then there are a few possibilities that the individual evaluates her options in the opportunity set. So the first possibility is that, well, for this individual, right, and this individual has a particular valuation system, so that with that valuation system, the individual has unique value-based ranking over those options, right? And then we use this information to help us to understand how this individual evaluates opportunity sets. So in this world, and then of course, the value of her freedom will be based on this particular unique evaluation ranking. And so, for example, and in this case, and suppose that individual has identified the two function bundles, two functions, so like health and education, right? And so with various bundles, and individual would put some sort of specific weights on health and on education to evaluate those bundles. And then we will use this information, and in particular, if individual values bundle X more than bundle Y, then that might have some implication on the way that individual ranks those various opportunity sets, right? And then we use that information. So that is possibility. Yeah, but other times, and we could imagine that individual is not quite sure about her future valuations, right? And so perhaps currently, and she thinks that health is more important than education. But well, perhaps in the future, and she might change her thinking, current thinking, saying that, well, I mean, it could be that education might be more important than health, right? So, in other words, individual is not sure about her own future valuations, not sure about future valuation-based rankings of those function bundles, right? And this uncertainty is determined by nature. So in this case, and the reason that when this happens, why individual would value freedom is because her freedom would give her some flexibility in the future, right? So again, and for example, and suppose that we go back to this strict monotonicity property. So there we consider two opportunity set. In the first case, opportunity set containing X and Y, two alternatives. And in the second case, opportunity set containing X. And well, suppose in this case, in the first case, opportunity set containing X and Y. And in this case, the individual may value the first opportunity set containing X, Y higher than the opportunity set containing X. The reason being that, well, even if X and Y are there, and so the reasoning here is that those two bundles, X and Y, they may contain different sort of levels of education and health, but she's not sure about her future preferences, her future sort of valuation. And so as a consequence, and she could imagine that, well, in the future, and even currently, she would value X higher than Y. But in the future, and it is possible that she would value Y higher than X. So with that, by having opportunity set containing both X and Y, that will give her some flexibility. So in case, and she values Y better than X, if that event happens, then she would be flexible to have to choose Y or X. So that is the kind of idea, adding her some flexibility for the future. And then, of course, one could also imagine that at any given time, right, and the individual may have a specific valuation and valuation-based ranking over those function bundles. But in the meantime, she's also autonomous in choosing her values, right? So she can decide to have different values as reflected in other valuations over those function bundles. So in this setting, and her freedom is valued because, well, it allows her to exercise her sort of autonomy to choose her values, perhaps in a meaningful way. And so this is more about the development of individuality, perhaps to some extent. The idea here can go back to John Stuart Mill on liberty, when he was trying to elaborate why we may value freedom. It's because we are autonomous agents, and we want to be ourselves so that we can choose who we are. And this autonomy, it plays an important role in the setting. So to summarize, and for self-evaluation, right, and we, the evaluator of individual freedom, tries to go by the individual's choice or the individual's evaluation system. So we tries to go by how that individual would evaluate those options, use that information to help us to visualize how that individual's freedom in terms of value of freedom can be evaluated. And then, of course, for the standard evaluation, and here is perhaps a slight sort of formal way of formulating this standard evaluation. So if a very large majority of individuals in a society that individual gives him rank all possible opportunity set in terms of their respective freedom offered to them in the same way, if that is the case, then everyone's freedom ranking will be the same as this particular freedom ranking, which used by this very large majority of individuals. So that is the kind of standard evaluation, one way of viewing standard evaluation. So again, to summarize and to use the information about the quality of options of function bundles in the operator set, and we can use those two methods, and self-evaluation or standard evaluation. And now for the next, I want to touch on briefly on this issue of interpersonal comparisons of individual freedom.
So can I ask a question here?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'm trying to understand, actually, if I compare these two approaches, individual and a standard approach, which one you will prefer for which types of countries or which types of cases, actually? Is there any comparison in terms of using in some specific cases?
I see. So you are saying that between the self-evaluation and the standard evaluation, how we should make a choice, right? Or are you asking if I have a preference over those two?
I'm asking if I want to use it for, say, for Bangladesh, which one will be appropriate to use for the case of Bangladesh, or is there any
Yeah, yeah. So there, and I mean, intuitively, and I would try to first gather information about the society that we want to study, right? So we try to gather information about that particular society. And so typically, and once we do that, and we will find that, well, even if we focus on that society, or so you're saying that Bangladesh, and even with that restriction, and it is a very, very possible, highly possible that individuals living in the society, they may have very diverse values. They may have very diverse valuation systems. So with that in mind, and to conduct meaningful research, I would try to use the self-evaluation. And it is, I know it is hard because it needs to gather the required information, and sometimes it is almost impossible mission impossible, all right? But that should be the way to go.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And actually, I think that so here we can touch on some of those and also discussed in Professor Patnaik's lecture. So briefly, and to make interpersonal comparisons of individual freedom. Remember that freedom here is in terms of the value of freedom offered to an individual, right? And so in this context, we run into similar problems as those discussed in Professor Patnaik's lecture when he was discussing how to make interpersonal comparisons of individual well-being. And well-being there was formulated in terms of achieved function bundles of individual. And so again, and roughly speaking, so I try to give you a sense about what is happening. So here we're trying to make a comparison of individuals, their values of individual freedom, all right? So there, and given that, and also as discussed in Professor Patnaik's lecture, and for any given society, and we may encounter the problem of diverse values coming from all those individuals, right? So with that in mind, even if we do not have the full-fledged self-evaluation, even if we do not appeal to self-evaluation, but suppose we try to accommodate the diverse values in a very minimal way, right? So in particular, think about two different opportunity sets. And one could imagine, well, perhaps for one individual, and that individual would value the value of freedom offered by A higher than the value of freedom offered by B. But on the other hand, we could have another individual who would have the reverse ranking. So for this another individual, and the value of freedom offered by B would be higher than the value of freedom offered by A. So suppose we have those two, and and we want to have introduced some kind of flavor of self-evaluation. Remember that we are not doing that entirely. We just say, well, I mean, imagine just for two opportunity sets and two individuals, their rankings of those two opportunity sets in terms of value of freedom offered to them differently, right? So suppose that is the case. And now we could also imagine, well, perhaps in some cases, and we have two opportunity sets, A and B. And well, opportunity set A is such that in terms of functioning bundles, right, offered, and functioning bundles in A would somehow dominate functioning bundles from B. Suppose there's some kind of domination. And then in that case, remember that we are trying to evaluate values of individual freedom offered to those individuals and taking into their evaluation system. So if in this case we have this kind of dominance between two opportunity sets, and then perhaps one could try to use, or Sen has been using, this kind of dominance intuition. And if A, opportunity set A dominates opportunity set B, then whoever ends up with opportunity set A would enjoy a higher value of freedom than whoever gets opportunity set B. So now if we combine those two, the minimal way of respecting individuals' self-evaluation, and then this kind of dominance relation, And if you combine those two together, yeah, and then with some technical assumptions on the freedom ranking, and we end up with, again, impossibility. So that's what Professor Paternak discussed in his lecture. So similar problem would occur. Yeah, well, to wrap up today's sort of lecture, I think I have been spending too much time on those, and I want to discuss this notion of individual freedom and notion of opportunity set in interdependent world, right? So again, remember that in the functioning capability approach, freedom is viewed as the freedom of individual to choose any functioning bundle from her opportunity set, right? And so here the question to ask is that, well, is there for each individual a set of functioning bundles which are feasible for her and any of which she can choose at will? And so in other words, is that the case that individual can choose any functional bundle from her opportunity set? And this question was first raised by Kaushik Basu in a different context. But it is, the issue is here as well. So let me sort of perhaps discuss two examples, and just to give us the idea about if an individual can really choose a particular function bundle from her opportunity set. And so the first example is the following. And so we have elderly living in an older apartment in Beijing, and the apartment building is less than 7 stories high, and no elevator. And that was the policy then. So when the building was built, so at that time, and if the building was no higher than 7 stories, and then no elevator required. The absence of elevators has apparently constrained the elderly from going out to interact with friends and families, right? And in recent years, the government has issued new policies permitting the residents, apartment owners, to install elevators if they all agree to have them installed. So it is not that easy, and because there are lots of constraints, and it would affect all the residents living there. But the installation of the elevator is determined through some form of bargaining and negotiation among those residents, right? So in other words, it's not that easy, and you have to go out to talk to your neighbors, to talk to other residents, and if they all agree, and then you can install. And some buildings they have installed, but other buildings they have not. And in this particular case, and they have not been successful. And now, in the functioning capability approach, and sometimes they identify interaction with family and friends as a valuable functioning. So in this case, then it seems to us that it is hard to see how the elderly can choose a functional bundle from her opportunity set. I mean, we choose the amount of interactions with family and friends. That, of course, depends on if she is mobile or not, right? And given that there's no elevator, and it would be very hard. And then another sort of example. So here we have household, and the household has sort of, I mean, there are two spouses, and they both earn income, and they decide how their total pooled income is to be allocated for food, housing, and so on, right? The allocation is determined through some form of intra-household decision-making mechanism, for example. So in this case, and it is difficult to see at least the whole, each spouse can be thought of as choosing a function bundle from her opportunity set, and you have to engage in discussion. And so it is, I guess that the message here is that, well, the problem with the way that we have been discussing individual freedom in the functioning capability approach is that, well, many times, all right, and it is hard to see how to visualize an individual of choosing particular function bundle from her opportunity set. And with that, and there are some sort of attempts in the literature on how to conceptualize individual freedom in this kind of independent world. And those attempts, they tend to emphasize on specific aspects of individual's power to ensure or to exclude certain outcomes to be realized. But so far, we have not seen them very satisfactory. So here, perhaps as exercise or for us to think a bit further, how to convincingly formulate a notion of individual freedom in a functioning capability approach. So that's my question to everyone.
Thank you.
The end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yongsheng Xu, for your excellent lecture. I would use the word excellent because it's so vivid and so clear. Because especially, I can assure you that in Bangladesh, in economic departments and in academic area of Bangladesh, this is totally a fresh and new perspective of interpreting freedom from functioning and opportunity bundles. So, so thank you again for your excellent explanation and presentation.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone's patience.
Thank you. And actually, what as usual, as per our tradition, actually, the next 5 to 7 minutes is speakers' rest time, and all of us we can informal raise up because the question answer session will start from after 5 to 7 minutes later. So I'm Professor Patnaik, Prashanto Patnaik is here, and Professor Dr. Swati Narayan is also here. Swati, would you like to say any comments or anything you'd like to say on today's lecture?
My apologies, I joined late, but it was an excellent lecture and, like you said, very clear and lucid.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex, this is your first session.
Hi, yes.
Yes. Can you open your camera?
Sorry, just give me a second.
Okay.
There we go.
Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'm so happy to be part of this. I think, intuitively, when someone says we're going to measure and rank freedom, there are a lot of sort of mental red flags going on, and I thought the way the prof sort of worked through, this is how we can do it, and then broke down the assumptions was a really nice way to approach it. Yeah, and I've got a whole lot of questions and things worth discussing, but yeah, I think at the very least, yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Alex. But keep up your notes on in the for the next Q&A session. So we'll come back to you surely. So, sir, Professor Patnaik, sir, would you like to say something?
Professor Xu has given us a very clear survey of the area, and I have not many things to say about it. Only I can emphasize again two of the problems that he has mentioned. One, how do we get the values by which we measure a person's freedom? And he mentioned two approaches: individual evaluation and evaluation on the basis of some sort of consensus, not unanimity, but a large majority based. I would like to point out some sort of a little bit of tension between two things there. This is an approach, functioning and capability approach, which is emphasizing the value of freedom, the individual's freedom. At the same time, sometimes faced with the problem of being able to compare interpersonal freedom, the approach sometimes takes an easy way out. We shall go by the majority opinion. Now, I find it a rather difficult thing to accept. Now, can you imagine a society which values freedom of the individual, and yet the majority tells an individual, look, you may think that this is how you value freedom, but we believe that your freedom should be measured according to the values that we have, the majority. In other words, there's an internal tension between the two things. The desire for the individual's value about freedom, and second, when we are running into difficulties, there is sometimes a tendency to say, okay, it is the majority which will tell the individual how his freedom should be. Now, this thing about telling an individual that this is how your freedom should be measured, because this is what the majority thinks, that seems to be a negation in a big way of the individual's notion of freedom itself. That's one thing I find Professor Xu's lecture brought out, which is very valuable. And the second, of course, is the other aspect. Do we really choose, can we really choose a functioning bundle? Freedom is being emphasized as the individual's freedom of choice of functioning bundles. But think about real life. How often do we choose a functioning bundle? The notion of freedom, there are various sorts of values involved. I should not be discriminated against because of my race or religion or color, etc., etc. Now, my freedom not to be discriminated against. But can I really choose anything like that? Because I can choose an action of mine, but ultimately the outcome will be determined by my action as well as the actions of others. We rarely have the freedom to choose an outcome. It is determined I have freedom of action, and that together with other people's freedom of action determines the outcome. In that context, to be able to choose a functioning bundle out of a set of feasible functioning bundle, that doesn't seem to be the way the real life works. I don't normally choose a functioning bundle to certain actions. That doesn't by itself determine my functioning bundle. That's the second theme that Professor Xu emphasized in a very clear way, which I find very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's very, very, very valuable to us too. Professor Maurice Saleh, may I ask you to say some words on Professor Yongsheng Xu's presentation? May I request you to unmute because we are not hearing. Yes, now.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. I say that I had not much to add. I have been much impressed by the last comments by Professor Patanek and also by the last remarks by Professor Xu regarding the interdependency of people, and how to deal with this in the capability approach is a very difficult question.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your valuable comment. And then Professor Kishore Khanna, would you like to say some words? Because after 2 or 3 minutes, when we will open the floor for Q&A session.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Ronie. This lecture was really wonderful, and it's really the extension of last lecture of Professor Patnaik. And right now, I don't have any special things to say because I'm not in the position
Okay, I understand.
to
Yes, I understand. Sabikul Nahar, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Would you like to say some comments or any remarks on Professor Yongsheng Xu, his presentation?
Actually, I really don't have any comments for this lecture because this is very organized and lucid lectures. I have understand and captured the whole thing. Thank you so much, Professor, about this. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. So, may I have Professor Yongsheng Xu's permission to open the floor for Q&A session, or some few minutes later or now? Whatever you like.
I'm fine now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's wonderful. So the floor is open. So functioning set. So you can function anyway. Just unmute and say that your queries or questions to Professor Yongsheng Xu. You can raise hand if we have a couple of questions so that I can make a queue. Altaf Russell, you want to ask something?
Actually, where Professor finished his lecture, I want to focus on the in the last slide. Actually,
Actually,
yeah.
how do you feel about his whole presentation? And then you go on to the specifics.
Actually, if I talk about the whole lecture, actually this is excellent. Everybody, my comment is not different to others' comment. We are all very pleased, and I can understand. Especially, I can understand how he explained these assumptions. I'm really impressed with this argument. Actually, actually, I would like to get some. If Professor would explain little bit about the last slide, actually, I want to understand.
This one, 29.
Yeah, this one, freedom in interdependent world, actually. This is very challenging, as I can understand, and this is the reality, if the world is interdependent. So this is very usual, but this is as well as challenging to measure freedom in an interdependent world. Actually, how we will actually address this challenge in measuring freedom in interdependent world. If professor could explain little bit more, then it would be helpful for understanding that part.
Okay. Professor Yongsheng, thank you, Altaf Russell. Professor Yongsheng, should I go by one or take couple of questions, then you answer, respond collectively? Or
Well,
one by
I
one?
can answer when the question comes, because otherwise I will forget.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
For this question, well, I'm going to go with the formulation of individual freedom in an independent world, interdependent world, right? So again, in a functioning co-bipedal approach, individual freedom is viewed as individual's ability to choose any functioning bundle from her opportunity set, right? But as we have been trying to illustrate, and also as Professor Pelenik sort of discussed minutes ago, and in a functioning co-bipedal approach, and if you ask the question, can an individual really choose a functioning bundle? So if we ask that question, and if now reflected real world, and then perhaps the answer is, well, it's very difficult to choose our own functioning bundle. And many times, and we can choose our actions. We can choose to do certain things, but it's very difficult to realize how we can choose particular function bundle. So with that in mind, and now if we want to think individual freedom in this kind of interdependent world, then perhaps game theory or this tool of game theory can be useful. So remember that in a game theoretical setting, and we have many individuals, players, right? And each has a strategy set, so actions that each of us can take. And then depending on our chosen actions, there would end up with some outcomes. So that is whole outcome, function bundles, can be determined in that world. So in this kind of framework, now if you want to make a connection between the ability of choosing function bundle in this world, and then we could sort of try to investigate various sort of so-called game structures or game forms, and see how the place of our actions through the rules of the game, it may give us certain outcomes. And then we try to think, well, is there any way that we can think in terms of individual's power of choosing certain outcomes? And of course, if there is one-to-one correspondence, one action corresponding to a particular outcome, and then I think it would, the earlier question, so like, can we really choose particular function bundle? That question would be answered easily in this simple the world in which one action corresponds to one particular outcome and vice versa, one-to-one relation. So there's no problem. But reality is that, well, many times, and your action alone will not correspond to a particular outcome, and it can give you the possibility of several possible function bundles happening, realizing, right? So there, and one perhaps intuition would you be like, well, can we talk about individual freedom in terms of individual's freedom of choosing various actions? So that is a possibility, and you can investigate what's going to happen, right? And uh, but and if you do that, and depending on the kind of game framework, game forms, and it may or may not give you the quote unquote good answer, and may not capture your intuition. So there, we want to perhaps tries to say, well, perhaps we should bring in the rules of the games so that all those outcomes are actually determined by individuals' joint actions, right? So if we do that, and then we could ask it or shift the question differently. So like, well, I mean, to what extent an individual can influence the occurrence, the happenings of those possible outcomes. And so in particular, and if we could imagine individual has lots of power or is very powerful in determining particular outcomes, and then in that case, and then there is a reason for believing or for saying that one individual can actually choose a particular functional bundles, right? But reality again is that, well, that may not be the case. And so there we need to think many other things. Well, I mean, what exactly can individual do in terms of securing some possible outcomes or securing to exclude certain outcomes? So are various powers that individual can have in this kind of setting. But I don't know if I
Okay, so you
All right.
explained
Thank you.
in the framework of game theory. If I ask you to explain in the framework of econometric framework, what will be the explanation econometric framework?
That's a very, very good question. And I myself have not dealt with any sort of data, so I don't know that much about econometrics. And so I don't want to sort of venture into that question in terms of econometrics. And well, my guess is that there and in terms, so you might want to sort of write down. I mean, remember that when you do econometrics, you have left-hand side, right-hand side, right? And so there, and you might be focused on your right-hand side parameters, say, and tries to gather data, see if any of those parameters can tell you about how this individual may be able to may realize particular functioning bundles. And so that I think that is the best I can do to answer that question. I'm sorry, I don't know that much about econometrics.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
My friend from HDCA, Su Ninku, she has a question. Su, can you unmute? Su, may I have your permission that I have a question, but that goes along with my friend Altaf Russell. That is so. Would you allow me to pose my question?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. This is I'm not in any hurry.
Okay. So, sir, Professor Yongsheng, what actually my question is like I was thinking about two scenarios, two set of two person. One individual is living in an apartment, and one individual living in a slum area. Slum means, slum means a very shanty housing with limited facilities and very vulnerable structure. So these two persons, so in regular economic view, like we measure by income, answered by the dominant view of evaluating such things, that that we explain these two persons in terms of income and in terms of educational background, something like that. But we have newly introduced this new view or window, social choice. Then we suddenly realize that outside of income bracket, there are much things, much area of an individual that has to be addressed, like functioning and the opportunity sets, etc. So if we want to improve or change the situation, like say for example, we want to increase or uplift the slum person's situation. So according to this freedom-centric explanation, where should we intervene through policy framework, or should we actually addressing his lack of capabilities or capability sets that actually creates his or her opportunities, new opportunities. That's where we should intervene, or we should intervene through just macroeconomic policy.
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. And it seems to me that question, that Professor Sen and Professor Anand, Professor Pelenik should answer that question. And I don't know. And of course, I mean, if you just focus on the macro policy, and typically macro policy about, I don't know, in many countries, how to grow economy in the fast possible way, grow the economy, those kind of things. And that may not help for this particular individual, second individual in question, right? And but in terms of I don't know. I mean, if you focus on the growth, and but in the meantime, and perhaps we should also focus on the distribution aspect. All right, and so tries to pay attention to individuals, all their individual situations, and to figure out how to help the person like the second person in question. I to be honest, and it is a very hard sort of question to answer, and I don't think I in a position to give any sort of good answer at this time. And I mean, many people have written books, and
No problem.
I don't know. And maybe Professor Pelenik has wants to jump in to answer that question.
Professor Pathshala, sir, would you like to?
No, maybe we can move on to other questions.
Professor Pathshala?
Just a brief comment. So there are two aspects. First, the functioning and capability approach has given us a wonderful range of ways of looking at a person's deprivations or whatever you call it. So, but there are two aspects. One is, what do we immediately need to do? We may not have a perfectly good theory, but we know what to do still. If a person is starving, I may not have a very good theory of measuring his starvation or viewing his starvation as a part of something bigger, but I need that policy immediately to prevent starvation. That's one aspect. But where the functioning capability approach has not performed that well so far is providing an underlying theoretical basis. It destroyed, in many ways, the utility-based approach. And the problem there was that they had a good theory, but that theory had several intuitive problems. Now, this approach is removing those intuitive problems, is giving us a broader perspective, but as yet, we have not been able to develop a reasonably good theory, underlying theory. The theoretical approaches are fraught with difficulties. And sometimes there is a tendency to say we don't need to look at these difficulties. That will be dangerous. Because if we don't look at these analytical difficulties, we might be doing something which is very well on the basis of immediate necessity, but over time, those difficulties can accumulate. Now, there, the aggregation problem is a very serious problem. How do I visualize an individual's freedom? I can talk about an individual's freedom to express a political opinion, but how do I measure overall freedom? For specific things, are very good concepts, but for overall concepts, aggregation, whether at the level of society, single individual, we don't have a good theoretical framework yet. It is seriously deficient, I think. I'm saying that not as a destructive criticism, I'm saying that as a constructive criticism, that if the underlying theoretical basis is weak, then that weakness will accumulate over time. We need to give attention even to these theoretical difficulties. And there, Professor Xu has given us a wonderful lecture, clearly analyzing what are the analytical difficulties.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, sorry, Professor Xu, go ahead, please.
No, there are two Sues. It's Professor Xu.
Oh,
Thanks, Professor Xu, for this lecture. And it's really kind of helped me think about how we relate. We kind of assume that different elements of the theory in the human development and capabilities approach are connected because we have similar sympathies. But it seems that what I'm missing in this treatment is the well-being component. And I think this really speaks to some of the elements that Professor Patnaik was referring to in what we're not facing up to in the theory, because we're assuming that it's a freedom, as Ronie says, it's a freedom-centered perspective. And we interpret freedom as being the maximization, the freedom to choose from a larger or most flexible bundle of functionings. And we assume that having more freedom then is equatable to having more well-being. But of course, this is not very descriptive of a usual human condition, because human beings are often fearful of freedom and dislike having an infinite set of choices. For example, if I ask my husband what would we have, or if he asked me what would we have for dinner, he doesn't want an endless discussion of infinite choices. He would become frustrated and angry with me. He really wants a sort of an optimized set of choices, which won't have too many choices. A, B, or C will be sufficient, and they should be, in some way rankable. And more, if I start going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, he will get very annoyed. And it's a bit like if I go to HTCA conference and I need to decide which thematic panel I'm going to go to. And it's fine if we have a choice between A, B, and C. It's quite easy to choose, but it's cognitively impossible when, as it was in Bradford, when we have panels A until S. We cannot choose from such a large choice, and in fact begin to experience rather ill-being in having so many inflexible choices. So that's one thing, and that's kind of about human nature and freedom, and our assumption that more freedom can be equated with more well-being. But the second observation I have is simply that we've kind of got a little bit presumptuous in thinking that more freedom does equate to more well-being. And not talking about the well-being part of it seems to be quite important. And I know we've talked about other things like interdependence and how are we going to deal with it. And I'm afraid to say I don't think game theory is going to get us there to well-being or to reconciling the question of well-being with the question of freedom. So these are very foundational topics. I know our foundational discussion group and thematic group has not been so active lately, but I think it's something that we should consider, because it seems that you are getting there in wondering, you know, how much one's model matters for making policy decisions, improving people's lives, and undertaking these realization-focused comparisons that Professor Sen would want us to do.
Yes, Professor Yongsheng Xu.
Right, thank you. I mean, those are the main sort of observations of the comments. And so I would say that, well, for the first one, of course, I mean, there is a cost of making choices. And I was wondering if it would be useful to make distinction between freedom of choice and the cost of making a choice when you face opportunity set. And as a matter of fact, I think I have seen some philosophers, they have written articles and books arguing that, well, sometimes you do not want to have more than, I don't know, a number of choices, and there's huge cost of making choices. But in a framework that we have been discussing so far, and of course we have not attached that part, and so I assume that somehow, and we assume that individual is kind of quote unquote rational, and so with the rational agent and faced those opportunity sets, and of course there will be some sort of deliberation going on in making a choice, but in that deliberation, and there's no sort of cost introduced, and sometimes in discussing those various options, and there are lots of agonies and lots of, I don't know, some other psychological burdens, right? And that is not in a theory, and but so there I was wondering if it would be useful to make distinction between the cost of making a choice and thinking through of making a choice so that you get a particular outcome. Yeah, so that is one. Yeah, then another about well-being, and of course in the functioning capability approach, they have this particular notion of individual well-being, and it is dependent on two things. One is on this achieve the functional bundle that individual can achieve, and then this opportunity set, capability set, from which this achieved functional boundary is realized. And in my presentation, I focused on the opportunity set, so the freedom aspect. But in the functioning capability approach, and it has this pair. You have achieved functional boundary and opportunity set together to determine individual well-being, and also individual well-being. Viewed that way, it's very different from preference, satisfaction, or from utility, or from happiness, and so very different from those sort of notions, right? And now, in terms of using game theory to think about individual freedom in the functioning capability approach. Well, I mean, game theory is just a tool, right, to help us to hopefully think about the issue more clearly. And if that's not help, then perhaps we can see where we got it wrong. And so, I mean, in a sense that now it sort of the earlier question about this whole we should think in terms of in a econometrical world, so that do some empirical studies applied the work about individual freedom, perhaps. So there, and if we do not use game theory, and then perhaps we can write down in a econometric sort of way an equation, left-hand side, right-hand side, right? So left-hand side will have individual's freedom, let's say. And then right-hand side, we try to identify those parameters that are important in contributing to the individual freedom, influence individual freedom, right? And so like if we are working in the functioning capability approach, and so that we could sort of try to identify those parameters, those factors that are important in sort of producing particular functioning levels of function bundles. So in that way, and so for example, if we think in terms of one of the functioning, so like interactions with friends and the family, right? So there, and on the right-hand side, and we might want to introduce things like your effort, your time, and also the effort and the time or availability by friends and the family members. So those parameters there. But that, I mean, again, and it is, I don't know if maybe just terminology, equal game theory or some other sort of thing. But game theory, again, it is too, just for us to use to hopefully conceptualize the difficulty faced by a functioning capability approach. And I'm not saying that, well, game theory is the only tool that we can use to think through those issues. And I'm saying that, well, game theory might help us to think through those issues. And if it doesn't help, then it's fine. And we know that, well, at least it doesn't help. We can try some other things. So that's all my response. I don't know if it makes any sense.
Now, thank you. Now I will turn to Alex. He has a beautiful black kitten on his bed. So, Alex, go ahead. You waited for a long time. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's fine. And apologies in advance if the cat makes the noise. It's that time of the evening. So
I love cats. I love cats. That's what
okay.
In my house,
we're all jealous of the cat. We all want to have a cat.
I've got two sort of areas of question or comments that I think are interrelated, or I'll try to connect them. I think the discussion question at the end was about an individual who's able to make any choice out of a functioning set that they want to. And I think a lot of the focus there seems to be the constraints, political, economic, social constraints on making those decisions. But another potential way to answer that question is to just say that they have a fairly limited or small set of desires, right? So you have a really small opportunity set or capability set. And so even though your freedom in that instance is quite limited, your functioning can still achieve everything you want to. And so in that instance, yes, you can, the individual can at will achieve whatever they want to because of the size of the choices they want to make, rather than constraints regarding their capabilities. And so I'm just interested in what you think about that approach to that problem. And then the second thing, and I think it's come up in various ways, but I think one of the things you mentioned earlier as well, Prof, is that when we look at interdependent worlds and interpersonal things, is that your choice doesn't always lead to the desired outcome, and so then there might be a new set of outcomes, but you don't sort of satisfy like what you intended to from your choice. And that's certainly one way to interpret that, is these sort of intervening factors from a interdependent world. But I think similarly, and to some degree this has been mentioned, is the question of whether you're a quote unquote rational, informed actor. But I do think that's relevant in this case, because your choice might not lead to the outcome you wanted to, and it might lead to other choices that you didn't want the outcome to be. If, for example, you're not informed about the consequences of those choices, or you're not able to make a rational decision. I think the Sen talking about like value of freedom and a future sort of flexibility. I think we know from behavioral economics that people are, discount costs over time and happen to be really irrational when it comes to making decisions for our future selves. So should we protect the future self from the decisions of the current self? But in any case, assumptions about information and rationality seem to me baked into the assumptions of the model, right? So if we're going to have transitivity, if we're going to have monotonicity, if we're going to have independence of irrelevant alternatives, there seems to be a degree to which we make assumptions about the nature of the behavior of the actors that we're analyzing. So to what degree do you consider these sort of questions of rationality and information in how people make choices to achieve happiness or well-being, or at least, express their freedom?
Right. Thank you for your questions. And so for the first question, and my impression that you are thinking, suppose we have an individual who thinks small, and then can always achieve whatever he thinks he wants to achieve, right? So that, to some extent, that reminds me of this utility theory, preference-based well-being theories. So there's adaptive preferences. So like, well, I mean, sometimes because of political system, and because of culture, and because of many other things. And some people would tend to adopt some kind of adapt some kind of norms, so-called norms prevailing in the society. So like, well, I mean, I'm coming from a poor family. I should not aim at that high, and I am a girl. I should not go to college. Those kind of things, right? That so there. And so if we use a kind of terminology, I don't know, it's if you aim small, and then you can always choose whatever you want. But I think in the functioning capability approach, yeah, this also relates to the second question. And there's no assumption about every time when a person makes a choice, the person always shoots for the best. The assumption is not there. It does not make that assumption. So rationality, I do not think in the functioning approach would be similar to the ones that we see in economics, because in economics we are motivated towards always maximizing. So you choose a consumer bundle to maximize your utility, but that is not the case in this world. So I think when the agent faces a small sort of opportunity set and small, so there we need to know what that means. Be small, does that mean that the small number of functional bundles or small in the sense of levels of achieved functional bundles? So there, I think they would need to make sort of distinction. And so, and then suppose that you view the smallness of opportunity set as not very many choices, right? And then in that case, and my guess that for Sen and for the functioning capability approach, and they would try to argue that, well, whenever the realized functional bundle may be for the individual, and if that individual faced with a small opportunity set to choose from at the very beginning, and the well-being of that person would be lower than otherwise. So that's one. And then again, and for this second question, it's about the rationality, as I said, and of course, I mean in approach that I was using to measuring individual freedom, and there are lots of assumptions made, right? And as you mentioned, transitivity of freedom ranking and other assumptions. But rationality and rational agent, and again, I think it's viewed very differently from the traditional economics. And so in particular, as I was saying, that there's no assumption made about choosing a bundle from a opportunity set that is the best. That is not there. And also about the kind of future evaluations determined by nature. So they're kind of the individual values freedom because of flexibility that freedom may bring to that individual faced with the uncertain future evaluations, right? And so there, yeah, you mentioned this about discounting, those kind of things. But that is something I think very different. And in a sense that let's see how I should formulate say this. Yeah. So remember that individual, right, is making is tries to compare those various opportunities today. And so like think about the choice of careers, right? And or choice of colleges that individual wants to go. And well, in that setting, and if individual is very sure or assured that, well, he wants to be a electrician. And then in that case, it might be sort of just go to a school that specializes in electrical engineering or whatever, right? Something like that. But on the other hand, if individual is not sure about the kind of career he wants to venture into in the future, and then in that case, if you choose to go to the specialized engineering school, and you will lose your freedom of choosing some other careers in the future. So that is why you don't. I mean, another school, maybe like more comprehensive school include, so that comprehensive school also has engineering schools there, might be giving you more flexibility in that setting. So it is about your choices of those various. You're not choosing a particular outcome today. You are trying to choose which path of life you want to go. And then when the tomorrow arrives, that is different thing. So in that sense, I do not think the discounting would be figured, because basically we are discussing so like different careers, the career choices, right? Those kind of things.
Great. Alex, is that all right for you, or you want to go more?
I mean, all of it answered my question. I'm
And I can read Su Min Ku's, my friend of HDCA. She wrote she wrote some questions. So Su, you are here, so you can unmute and say these words.
It's not really a question. So I just feel bad that I'm taking people's time, and we are going over time already. Do you know,
Yes.
Ronie? I mean, but it was
Yes,
simply
yes.
because I thought, it was somewhere in Professor Zhu's lecture today, you raised the question of, the quantity of choices, which I kind of questioned, and then the question of the quality of the choices, which we can't easily resolve this problem very quickly. But certainly I was reflecting on the earlier discussions by Professor Prashanta Patnaik about, the different kinds of choices that people make, and the question about, freedom being measured as being how large the set would be, or how flexibly large the set could be, is really what we would privilege to maximize the freedom aspect logically. But there are other logics. And this kind of reflects, the million idea of the higher utilities versus just plain utilities. And the example of Tolstoy or Gandhi choosing to live a very simple life and having a smaller set of choices, not really reflecting the smallness of the choice, but actually these were expansive choices. They were million higher utilities, which, just keeps bringing us back to the difficult question of evaluating different qualities of choices, rather than merely potential quantities of them. So yeah, they were just the two nice examples that Professor Patnaik raised in a previous lecture, which has given us lots of food for thought.
Yes.
Yeah, and that again, that shows that, well, I mean, this the measurement of freedom is very complex, and perhaps we should at least think, well, perhaps go by that individual's evaluation.
Right. Alex, you want last comment or last
Yeah,
anything?
just quickly.
We need
because-
to close the session because 2 hours is over. Okay.
Sorry,
Okay,
it'll
just go
be
ahead. Just go ahead.
Very, very quickly, because I understand that we don't care that much about rationality because we care about people being able to make the choice, not whether they make the optimized choice. I understand that. But at the same time, we're not neutral to the outcome of the choice, right? So if we give people freedom, but they consistently make choices contrary to their own, like what they actually want, their expressed interests, that's a problem. Like we don't give freedom to children to make like a large set of like freedom and choices because we do care about the content of the choices they make. We do care that they're informed and rational. And it seems to me that it's just really difficult to kind of balance those two things because either you like it's really difficult to say I care about a little bit of rationality and informed choice, but not really because I don't care about the outcome of those choices.
Agree.
So
Right.
in that case, do we need to accommodate the NAS theory actually? What Alex explained about children choice. In that case, we know there is a theory called NAS theory. So, what do you think about the NAS theory in this regard?
Nasty choice.
I'm talking about NAS theory. NAS theory means taking the guardianship.
Richard Thaler's
Richard
Thaler's
Thaler's
Ah, the
theory.
nudge. I see.
Nudge,
Nudge.
जी.
I see.
Yes.
So
Professor
actually, in
Maurice,
that,
Professor
and
Maurice Salles' grandchildren is here. So, Professor Maurice, share our love and sweet love and affection to your grandchildren. Yes. So, sorry. So, Professor Yongsheng Xu, you want to conclude now or go on?
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you all for being here and asking those questions. And some of the questions, again, that will keep me busy for the next few days and maybe a few weeks. And I will be thinking of those questions. And perhaps we could exchange through email and through other sort of means. And again, thank you very much for hosting and for being
Thank
here
you.
and for those very, very
Thank you.
interesting questions.
Thank you. Thank you,
very much.
Professor Yongsheng Xu, Professor Patnaik, Professor Maurice Salles, and his grandchildren. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. So that concludes
Push the ball.
so that concludes our today's session 4. So next session will be on November 1st, same time. So see you on the next session 5. So until then, take care and goodbye. Take
Bye-bye
care.
for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.